In the darkest corners of Nazi concentration camps, a system of calculated cruelty existed that many history books still hesitate to mention. While the gas chambers and medical experiments have been documented extensively, another horror was deliberately engineered by SS leadership, a network of forced brothels where female prisoners were sexually enslaved to serve male inmates. Welcome to Through the Ages, where we uncover the most shocking and forgotten moments in history that altered the trajectory of our modern world. If you're new here, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss our weekly explorations into history's darkest corners and untold stories. Today, we expose one of the most disturbing chapters of Nazi atrocity, not just as a historical footnote, but as a calculated weapon of psychological warfare designed by Heinrich Himmler himself. In March 1942, as Nazi Germany's war machine was reaching its peak, SS Chief Heinrich Himmler issued a chilling directive. Concentration camps across the Reich were to establish what the Nazis euphemistically called special buildings, brothels where female prisoners would be forced to sexually service male inmates deemed worthy of reward. This wasn't some rogue operation or the sadistic whim of individual camp commanders. It was official policy, meticulously planned at the highest levels of Nazi leadership. The question is, why? Himmler's stated reason was productivity. In a memo to camp administrators, he wrote that these brothels would provide diligent workers with a bonus and increase their productivity. The Nazi leadership had noticed that starving, brutalized prisoners weren't working efficiently enough. Rather than improve their inhumane conditions, Himmler chose sexual exploitation as his solution. But beneath this cold economic calculation lay something far more sinister, a deliberate strategy of psychological warfare and dehumanization that perfectly aligned with Nazi ideology. Historian Robert Sommer, who spent years researching this forgotten chapter of Holocaust history, discovered that these brothels served multiple purposes in the Nazi system of control. The brothels were not just about productivity, Sommer wrote, they were about power, humiliation, and breaking down human dignity on both sides. For the SS, the brothels created new hierarchies among prisoners, pitting them against each other for privileges. They turned sex, normally an expression of human intimacy, into a transaction that degraded both parties, and perhaps most insidiously, they forced prisoners to become complicit in the abuse of other prisoners. The women who suffered in these brothels were primarily selected from Ravensbrück, the notorious women's concentration camp north of Berlin. Most were German or Polish political prisoners, or women labeled as asocials, a category that included anyone the Nazis deemed socially undesirable. Jewish women were explicitly excluded from brothel service due to Nazi racial laws that forbade race defilement. This wasn't mercy, it was another expression of the twisted racial ideology that permeated every aspect of Nazi rule. The recruitment process was anything but voluntary. Despite SS documents that cynically described it as such, survivors like Margaret W., who was forced into the Buchenwald brothel, later testified, "They told us we would be released after 6 months of service. It was a lie, like everything else they promised." Women were often presented with an impossible choice: certain death in the main camp or survival through sexual slavery. Those who refused faced severe punishment or execution. Those who agreed were subjected to humiliating medical examinations, forced sterilization, and a regimen of preparation that included better food and hygiene, not out of compassion, but to make them more appealing to the male prisoners who would use them. Antonio Bruja, an Austrian resistance fighter who survived Ravensbrück, revealed that the SS made distinctions even among the women they selected. The most attractive women were sent to the SS brothels, she testified after the war, while the less attractive ones were sent to the prisoner brothels. This two-tier system reflected the Nazi obsession with hierarchy. SS brothels, staffed by prisoners but serving the camp guards, operated under different rules than the prisoner brothels. The women in SS brothels faced even more brutal treatment, with many dying from the violence inflicted upon them. The brothel buildings themselves were designed for maximum efficiency and control. A central corridor typically ran through the structure, with small rooms on either side. Each room contained little more than a bed, and sometimes a chair. Guards could observe the transactions through peepholes in the doors, adding voyeuristic humiliation to the women's suffering. Male prisoners who wanted to visit the brothel had to apply formally, undergo medical examination, and pay with camp scrip or special coupons. The entire process was bureaucratized in typical Nazi fashion. Forms were filled out, records were kept, and rules were posted. Only about 1% of male prisoners ever visited these brothels. They were primarily privileged inmates, kapos, block leaders, or skilled workers whose labor was especially valuable to the Reich. For most prisoners, starving and worked to exhaustion, sexual desire was the last thing on their minds, but the brothels served their psychological purpose regardless. Their very existence created another layer of competition and division among prisoners. Men who couldn't access them felt further degraded. Those who did often felt shame afterward, exactly as the SS intended. Survivor testimonies reveal the profound psychological damage inflicted on both the women forced into sexual slavery and the men who visited them. One male survivor from Buchenwald wrote after the war, "It was not pleasure. It was another form of humiliation. We knew these women were prisoners like us, forced into this, but we were so desperate for any human contact, any reminder that we were still men." For the women, the trauma was immeasurable. They were required to service up to 20 men per day. Many developed severe psychological disorders. Some attempted suicide. Those who survived often carried their shame in silence for decades. Remarkably, Robert Sommer's research found that despite these horrific conditions, almost all women who were forced into brothel work survived the camps. This wasn't mercy, it was calculated. The SS needed these women alive to maintain their system of rewards and psychological manipulation. When the war ended and the camps were liberated, the women from the brothels faced a new nightmare. Unlike other survivors, they were often viewed with suspicion or contempt. Many were shunned by their communities. Some were even attacked by former male prisoners who saw them as collaborators rather than victims. The post-war German government refused to recognize them as legitimate victims of Nazi persecution. They were denied compensation and excluded from survivor programs. Their suffering was buried under layers of shame, stigma, and deliberate forgetting. One survivor, identified only as Frau W., in post-war records, testified, "After liberation, I couldn't tell anyone what happened to me. Not my family, not the authorities. They would have blamed me. So I carried this alone for decades." It wasn't until the 1990s, nearly half a century after the war, that women like Margaret began to break their silence. Even then, they faced skepticism and victim blaming. Some were accused of having been voluntary prostitutes, a cruel distortion of their forced enslavement. The brothel system reveals something profound about Nazi ideology and its approach to human degradation. For the Nazi leadership, particularly Himmler, Sexuality was another tool of control, something to be regulated, exploited, and weaponized. This was the same Himmler who simultaneously promoted racial purity and traditional family values for Aryan Germans while creating systems of sexual exploitation in the camps. The contradiction didn't trouble him because in Nazi ideology, different rules applied to different categories of humans. Those deemed subhuman could be used however the regime saw fit. The brothel system also exposes the calculated psychological warfare at the heart of the concentration camp system. Every aspect of camp life was designed not just to extract labor or eliminate enemies, but to break the human spirit itself. By forcing prisoners to participate in each other's degradation, the Nazis created a moral maze from which no one could emerge unscathed. This was perhaps their most insidious achievement, making victims complicit in a system that destroyed them all. It's only in recent years that Germany has begun to officially acknowledge these women's suffering. In 2006, the first academic conference on Nazi camp brothels was held in Berlin. In 2007, a memorial was finally dedicated to the women forced into sexual slavery. But for most of the victims, this recognition came too late. They had already lived and died with their trauma unacknowledged, their suffering uncompensated, their stories untold. The story of Nazi concentration camp brothels isn't just about sexual violence, though that was horrific enough. It's about the deliberate weaponization of sexuality as a tool of psychological warfare. It's about how totalitarian regimes attack human dignity at its most intimate level. And it's about how easily victims can be silenced when their experiences don't fit neatly into acceptable narratives of suffering. These women, numbered, used, and discarded, deserve to be remembered not just as victims, but as individuals who endured one of the most dehumanizing systems ever devised. Their stories, painful as they are to hear, must be told if we are to understand the full scope of Nazi atrocity and ensure such calculated cruelty never happens again. If you found this video informative, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. Share your thoughts in the comments below, but please remember to be respectful. These are real human tragedies we're discussing. This is Through the Ages, where history's darkest moments come to light. Until next time.